happened in the past. But what is happening is actually the complete opposite. We are giving Putin an opportunity to frame NATO and its allies as bad. And on top of that, we are only hurting the poor population of Russia, who has done nothing wrong, and while they are still being harmed. Dear judges, in this speech, I'm going to be doing two things. First of all, I will be introducing our model, and then I'm going to be giving two arguments. First of all, why Russia's response to the sanctions has been extremely harmful, and then second of all, why Russia will respond well to negotiations. So then, our model. Well, currently we see that sanctions have not worked. This is because they only harm the population from which Putin's power is not derived. And in fact, they only help Putin, as you already explained in my intro. So then, who is going to lift these sanctions? Well, we will make all countries...
Point of information.
No, thank you. We are going to make all countries that are currently imposing sanctions on Russia, mostly the US, Canada, and the EU, lift these sanctions and seek negotiations with Russia in order to solve the problem that we currently have with Russia. Okay, then our first argument: why Russia's response to sanctions has been extremely harmful. Well, first we need to establish that Putin's power is not derived from his people. Putin is a dictator who does not care about his population. His power is derived from the support of rich oligarchs who still support I'll take it in a minute, who still support him. So then, as I already touched upon in my intro, these sanctions only hurt the poor / middle class, which is a massive part of the Russian population. And as I also already explained, Putin's power is not derived from these people. Yes.
Would your side lift sanctions on all rogue states and never use them in the future, like on North Korea and Iran, for example?
Well, not specifically, because we see that in these countries, these sanctions have been shown to actually have some amount of effect. Whereas with Russia, it is also simply based on what we're seeing in the current world, they are not really having a positive effect. Because Putin is able to use these sanctions as a method of painting NATO as anti-Russian. So then, now that we've established that sanctions only hurt the poor people, well, oligarchs still support Putin. That is simply...
Point of information.
No, thank you. That is simply true. So then, the Kremlin does not care about its people because it's not a democracy. With the result that, for one, these poor people are the ones being hurt by sanctions because they are the ones who suffer from increased food prices and the worse economy. And then, secondly...
Information.
No, thank you. And then, secondly, the Kremlin is actually able to use these sanctions as a way of painting the West as anti-Russian, as I already explained, meaning that they can use this as justification for further aggression in areas such as Crimea and Syria. So, which means that sanctions are actually causing more conflict rather than solving any of it. Okay, so then, our second argument, why Russia will respond well to negotiations.
Sorry.
Okay.
Usually sanctions are in the form of travel bans and freezing assets of specific individuals such as oligarchs. How exactly does this harm the average poor Russian citizen?
Okay, so what we see, the primary type of sanction that is imposed on Russia is bans of sale of technology that is required to drill for gas and oil and the like. This means that this is costing oligarchs money, but they will simply pass this cost onto their employees by paying them less, which means that their employees are in fact the ones being harmed, while these oligarchs are still making the same amount of profit. Okay, so then, the argument I was explaining about why Russia is likely to respond well to negotiations. Well, first of all, we need to see that there are currently already a lot of tensions between NATO and Russia. So, which means that there is less trade between the two because of the sanctions. So then, if we lift the sanctions, this means that the Russian economy is going to improve, which is going to please the oligarchs, which will mean that they are going to exert pressure on the Kremlin to further to further repair the relationship with the EU and other countries imposing sanctions in order to improve their profits even more. So then as I explained in my first argument, is that this will stop them painting NATO as anti-Russian, which means they can't keep using this as justification. So then this has two main impacts. First of all, about how oligarchs, if these oligarchs are applying pressure,
Point of information.
I will not be taking any more POS from now on. So then, if the oligarchs are exerting pressure on the Kremlin, the Kremlin is going to negotiate with NATO because these oligarchs, the Kremlin does care about these oligarchs because they are the ones from which their power is derived. So then, once these negotiations have started, this means that we are able to address real issues and make Russia stop, for example, their use of chemical weapons in Syria and problems like that. And so then the second impact is that once there is more trade with Russia, there will be more foreign influence because with trade, there will also be some amount of ideas that are transferring, which will lead to the democratic ideas being more widespread in Russia, which means that more people are going to start holding these values, which means that there is going to be more democracy in Russia, which means that the people in this country are going to stop being as oppressed and are finally able to have a voice as to what they want to happen to their country. So, if you want Russia to stop policing the world, and help the Russian populace, we urge you to vote proposition. Thank you.
I would like to call on the first speaker of the opposition.
Western politicians in the 20th century posited that building relations with China would create a free and democratic state. But rather than accepting international law, China has only taken advantage of international goodwill and used that to build the world's most overbearing and expansionist dictatorship. We on side opposition will not make the same mistake again. What is our policy? We would not lift sanctions or repair relations with Russia. Rather, we support targeted sanctions, like the US and the European Union already have on key Russian figures. This involves freezing foreign assets of key Russian companies belonging to oligarchs, slapping travel bans on politicians in Putin's inner circles. Obviously, we do not have to stand for the indiscriminate use of sanctions. What this debate is about is the availability of targeted punitive measures as a response to Russian belligerence. Furthermore, we don't think that sanctions necessarily have to continue indefinitely. We are perfectly willing to drop sanctions in the future if Russia complies with international laws. But as status quo is now, Russia has not done so, and lifting sanctions only serves to embolden it further. In fact, opposition thinks that Russia will never ever come to fully cooperate with international law. That is why we need sanctions as a response against Russian belligerence. Two responses to the arguments coming up from side proposition. First, on harming innocent Russian people in the Russian population, and second argument coming from proposition about which side engenders better change on the ground. So first argument on how it harms Russian population. Notice that this argument coming up from proposition is just not true. Because in status quo, there are already implementation of targeted sanctions rather than blanket sanctions in reality. This means targets on specific key levers of power in Russia. As first speaker wants to tell us how Putin's powers depend on the oligarchs, for example, we completely agree, which is why sanctions in place by the West now are targeted on these key individuals. The most sensible line coming out from first proposition is that oligarchs will pass these costs over to innocent people on the ground. Therefore, regardless of whether it's targeted or not, it doesn't matter. But recognize that in response to our point of information, first proposition says that they will not lift sanctions on other rogue states like Iran and North Korea because his argument is that it has worked. Why do you think that these sanctions have worked? Because the sanctions on other rogue states like Iran and North Korea, for example, also has spillover effects onto innocent people on the ground. By their logic of never ever harming any innocents on the ground whatsoever, we will never wage any justified war in status quo. So proposition regrets all the wars that were fought in the past against strongmen like Hitler, for example. We need the cause of innocence in certain instances in which it is justified. Especially, given my argument will explain later, how their side also harms innocent Central Asians, innocent Eastern Europeans who are at the mercy of Russia. There's no reason coming up from proposition why the innocents in Russia matter more than the countless other individuals and many more other individuals that Russia is harming. Second argument on proposition about engendering effective change on the ground. Recognize that on their side, their argument is to empower Putin's rhetoric that the West is bad because of these sanctions. No, thank you. This is not true. Because Russian citizens on the ground know that the sanctions will stop at the point in which Russia is not aggressive. Plus, on our side, in my arguments I'll explain later, how Russia has less capital now to be aggressive at the point in which we implement sanctions. But some proposition tells us that they get more leverage over Russia, because now it can force it to open up economies, to introduce ideas of democracy. I'll be dealing with this in my first argument. My first argument will be on maintaining leverage over Russia. My second argument will be on curbing Russian belligerence, and my second speaker will argue on how we empower opposition parties in Russia. First argument on maintaining leverage over Russia, and here's where I deal with their idea about introducing democratic ideas into Russia. The thesis of this argument is that sanctions are needed to preserve the international community's ability to defend against Russian aggression. Premise: lifting sanctions means that the rest of the world is opening up their economy to Russia. As proposition rightly points out, it means intertwining economic activities. But what this looks like is importing Russian oil and agricultural products into your country, letting Russian businesses operate in your country and having your citizens be reliant on Russian goods. But what this truly entails is a newfound dependency on the Russian economy. It makes the rest of the world vulnerable to Russian policy making. Russia can therefore, on side proposition, threaten to cut off all supplies, block trade routes for perishable food items in exchange for ridiculous political demands. The problem with proposition is that Russia has every incentive to do so on their side, two structural reasons. First, Russia's objective is diametrically opposed to an international rules-based order. If people want to restore national pride and return to the glorious Soviet era where it was once the big brother, nostalgia for the Soviet Union is seen currently in over 60% of Russian people expressing regret at the fall of the Soviet Union, continued veneration and erection of new Stalin monuments and statues. Second reason, Putin's own survivability depends on being oppositional to the West. His entire political campaign rests on vilifying the West and painting himself as Russia's defender. Furthermore, Putin has issued too many threats for him to back down. Now, repairing relations with the West would be shooting himself in the foot. Why will democratic ideals therefore not be introduced into the West? Because Putin can simply refer to the model of China and copy that particular model. China, for example, is perfectly willing to sell its goods overseas, but at the same time imposes bans on foreign companies entering their own soil. Therefore, Russian products can therefore flood other countries, but they can just obstruct entrance of democratic ideals or Western corporations and businesses from coming into their country. Therefore, all the talk about the democratization that's coming from side proposition will not occur simply because Putin has the ability to allow his goods to flow out, but not external goods to flow in. Furthermore, these two reasons that I just mentioned mean that Russia will never ever cooperate with the international community. They will never ever comply with international norms. This means that countries already vulnerable to Russia are now held at literal gunpoint. Ukraine, for example, already at the risk of invasion, Kazakhstan and Bulgaria and many other countries already at the risk of being beholden to Russian oil. On their side, when you push these countries to become dependent on the Russian economy, economic coercion is what Putin will use to re-establish dominance over other countries. In a world where Russia cannot realistically exert military might without mutually assured destruction, proposition offers up a new weapon to them on the silver platter. We reject that. Second argument on curbing Russian belligerence. And the thesis of this argument is that sanctions handicap Russia's ability to be aggressive. Premise: Russia's foreign policy is highly dependent on Russian oligarchs, since Putin is immensely beholden to them for political stability. Proposition already talks about this. Giving you examples, Timchenko controls majority of energy, transport, and infrastructure and assets. In Russia, for example, Kovalchuk, chairman of Rossiya Bank in Russia, manages Putin's own personal finances. This means when Putin constructs foreign policy, he has to take the interests of these individuals into account. But the problem of proposition is that there's virtually no response to any Russian action. Because without the implementation of sanctions on Russian oligarchs, proposition has no proxy via which to pressure Putin to change foreign policy. It has no bargaining chip to negotiate with Russia to cut back on belligerent actions. Recognize that proposition's case rests entirely on the goodwill of a strongman who has proven time and time again he cannot be trusted. On our side, targeted sanctions limit Russian belligerence because it makes life miserable for Russia's rich and powerful who have the ability to influence foreign policy. Oligarchs suffer when their assets are frozen, when they cannot travel overseas to conduct business. That is when they pressure Putin to change Russian aggression and stop attacking other countries so that sanctions will be lifted and therefore their businesses are not negatively affected. Second, Russia also now has less capital to fund military aggression when there are sanctions. Sanctions reduce Russia's ability to purchase military equipment, for example, or to fund pariah states like Syria and Iran. I challenge second proposition to tell us why they will embolden Russia with complete inaction from the international community. On our side, we believe removing sanctions on Russia relinquishes our responsibility to peace, proud to oppose.